All right, good afternoon, everyone. We are going to start. I see some people are still arriving, but we are 5 minutes past schedule, so I will call it the start. It's my pleasure to welcome you today to this DILEMA lecture with Dr. Tim Sweijs, who will discuss the topic of military AI and international norms development. My name is Bérénice Boutin, and I'm the project leader of the DILEMA Project carried out here at the Asser Institute. DILEMA stands for Designing International Law and Ethics into Military Artificial Intelligence. And the acronym, of course, also captures that our topic of research includes many ethical or legal dilemmas. The DILEMA Project analyzes how to address the challenge raised by AI technology in the military context, focusing on three main questions. First, we look at why fundamentally some form of human agency over military technologies should be guaranteed. Secondly, where precisely the role of human agents must be maintained, in particular to ensure legal compliance and accountability. And thirdly, how to technically ensure that military technologies are designed and deployed within ethical and legal boundaries. I invite you to visit our website, asser.nl/dilemma, to read more about the project and our activities. And as you've seen next to the registration table and the entrance, we have a number of printed copies of our publications. There's much more papers to be found on our website. We couldn't print them all, so please have a look if you're interested to read more about the project and our research. For today's lecture, we are very thrilled to have with us one of the leading thinkers in the field as guest lecturer today, Dr. Tim Sweijs. Tim Sweijs is the Director of Research at the Hague Center for Strategic Studies here in The Hague, and the Senior Research Fellow at the Netherlands Defense Academy. He's the Scientific Advisor to the Secretariat of the Global Commission on Responsible AI in the Military Domain, an initiative of the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And he has extensive experience in engaging with international organizations, governments, defense departments across the globe. His research and work combines political science, science and technologies, strategic studies, and war studies. He has published numerous books, articles, and studies on strategic foresight, contemporary and future war, emerging technologies, defense and national security planning, and strategy and capability developments. You can check his full biography and list of publications on the website of HCSS. So now Tim will deliver the lecture, after which there will be a Q&A session that I will moderate. And after this, we'll invite you to join a reception that will take place just outside the room here, so we can continue the discussion and network more informally. Tim, thank you so much for being with us today, and I would like to invite you to take the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen, can you hear me loud and clear in the back? Yes, you can. Excellent. Nice to see you all gathered here today. Let me start off by thanking Bérénice for inviting me to share my thoughts on the very timely and urgent topic of whether and how AI in the military domain can be regulated. And Bérénice, you and your team, some of whom I know, have done a tremendous job over the past couple of years in the context of the DILEMA Project on this very question. To what extent can we and how can we regulate the development and application of AI in the military domain? Now, things move very fast in the realm of AI, as we've seen over the past decades, years, months, weeks, and even days, I dare say. But to the extent that it's possible, they move even faster in the realm of military AI. If you look at what we've seen over the past few years, we've seen the publication of military strategies by preeminent military powers. We've seen considerable investment and growing investments in military AI-enabled applications. We've seen, and that is quite important from a bureaucratic perspective, the establishment of military AI units, both at the strategic level, but now also at an operational level within ministries of defense. And we've seen the announcement of a growing number of military initiatives in this sphere. And these military AI initiatives occur along the entire OODA loop, along the entire observe, orient, decide, and act loop. whether it's the automated analysis of images and decision-making support in the generation of course of action, whether it's deployment in the field as part of semi-autonomous or even autonomous weapon systems, as there's growing rumors over the past months really as to what's happening in Ukraine. We've seen a proliferation of visions of how AI can upset strategic stability in peacetime, how it can change the balance of power between China and the US, but also how the emergence of military AI will upset the character of war as we used to know it, the human character of war. Now, with that, we've also seen the rapid emergence of foundation models, right? But which we know better under the term of large language models or ChatGPT as a concrete manifestation, but there are of course many, many others. And now behind closed doors, but sometimes we also see it in effect, we see that there is active experimentation and as to how these large language models can inform the ways in which military organizations actually fight. Now, on top of all this, this has gone from speculation or science fiction to actual reality, right? I mean, many of us have read papers, have seen images on televisions or on our computer screens as to how systems with ominous names such as the Gospel or Lavender have been used in battlefields around the world in targeting processes, right? And in Israel, we've seen companies such as Palantir and Clearview turning the battlefields of Ukraine into a quote-unquote living war lab. And we also have persistent rumors, I already said it just now, I mean, from people in Ukraine that say that here systems are being used in autonomous modes in the context of the very contested battle space. Now, it is within this context today that I will talk about military AI and international norms development with the pretentious title Quo Vadis, where is this field moving to? And before I do so, perhaps it's useful to say a few words about how I come at this topic. My own research program is rather diverse, but a unifying thread there really is war. War and warfare, and then specifically the causes of war, why political actors wage war and how this can be prevented, but also ways of war. Once they do go to war, how do these actors go about warring, go about fighting? Some of my work is historical in nature, but most of it is focused on contemporary war and warfare. Now, a critical element here, people look at war and they see organizations using violence to attain their political objectives, but this is not random violence. It is organized violence in the service of achieving or attaining political objectives. And interestingly enough, political actors create rules and regulations to guide their behavior. So war is also constrained by rules and regulation. And this includes both the behavior of these actors during war, but also their behavior outside of war. It involves the visions, the perceptions of war that key actors have. What is it and what is it not? It is about how they think they can use war, political violence to achieve their objectives. But it's also about how they conceive of force and the nature of force. And here, if you think about the nature of force, this is about, I should say, affected and shaped and determined by broader social, technological, political developments. So force nowadays looks very differently from what it looked a couple of hundred years ago. Now, if war is the ultimate outcome of a strategic competition between opposing political entities, it is a product of social interaction. And since war's early days, it has been shaped by rules. At least as far as we can go back in written history, we see that actors try to devise rules and regulations. So Western ideas concerning the jus ad bellum and the jus in bello date back to at least Cicero. And the Asser Institute, of course, here represents the epicenter, at least here in The Hague, and I would say in the Netherlands, as to scholarly expertise about that particular issue, jus ad bellum and jus in bello. But as we've seen throughout history, once new technologies come online, and you see I'm using an idiom that derives from modern day technologies, political groups start using these technologies to further their political objectives. And they use this to threaten their objectives, to threaten their opponents, but also to actually use them in the context of war. But at the same time, they also start devising new rules and regulations to control the spread of these technologies, the spread and the use. To give you a few examples, the crossbow in the 11th century Europe, they tried to regulate, they tried to outlaw, they didn't succeed at doing so, but they did. Handguns in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century under the shogunate in Japan was quite successful for a very long period of time. Submarines, balloon-delivered projectiles, expanding bullets, which were all topic of the Hague, the Hague Conventions, right in this very city in 1899 and 1907. Poisonous gases, which sort of were outlawed already for hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of years, at least attempts to outlaw them. Poisonous gases and chemical weapons, from these early attempts to the Biological Weapon Convention in 1972 and the Chemical Weapon Convention in 1993. Onto landmines, 1997, cluster munitions in 2008, but there were already previous attempts in 1868, if you want to go back in history. Onto, of course, which we're probably more familiar with, nuclear arms control treaties between the US and the Soviet Union to curtail the risk associated with nuclear weapons by putting numerical limits on the number of systems that they could deploy. Onto broader treaties, such as the Missile Technology Control Regime, or the Wassenaar Arrangement to control the proliferation of dual-use technologies. So this is sort of to take a step back and put in perspective. Let me talk into mic so that the online transcription can still follow. This sort of speaks to the fact that seeking to control and regulate new technologies is very old. One, and two, these efforts go beyond their actual use in war itself, but target the entire production, proliferation, deployment, and employment chain. The key question is, of course, why do political actors do this? Why do they come up with rules and regulations to control the use of technology? There are a number of reasons, and I'm not going to be exhaustive here, but let me point out three. First and foremost, there are strategic interests. Political actors, military actors want to maintain an advantageous position of power because they can benefit from having this for themselves while denying others access. Two, there are stability interests. It's related to the first one, but it's related to make sure that these technologies do not undermine overall stability. It can include strategic stability, and we have one of the foremost nuclear weapon experts in the room here in the back. But it can also be stability more broadly, that it can affect international security and thereby undermine also your own national security. And three, last but not least, it's of course values to prevent human suffering and to make sure that these technologies are not used in a way that is not in accordance with basic precepts of international law and international humanitarian law. Now, the extent to which political actors succeed in regulating technologies, of course, shapes the nature of competition in peacetime and the character of war in wartime. Now, it is from within that background that I approach the question as to how can we, whether and how we can regulate AI in the military domain. I started looking into the ramification of AI from, I think about 8-9 years ago. In a larger study project we did on artificial intelligence and the future of defense. And back then that was really very speculative and almost science fiction-like. because it was something that people thought that AI was something for computer people, and back then had nothing to do with defense as such. Since then, I've published on and off about various aspects of AI and its impact on peace, war, and warfare, alongside a number of other studies on deterrence and arms control to control and regulate emerging technologies, including, and this is why I was very pleased to receive your invitation, Bérénice, including studies about how we can use norms, international norms, to shape the behavior of states. Because typically realists, people that focus on the hard security, they tend to discount the softer forms of rules and regulation and international norms, whereas in effect, we know it shapes the behavior. Now, with that, I'm also proud of the fact that this is an emerging field. It has historical roots, but AI and its impact on defense is an emerging field. And I'm proud that I've co-authored a number of studies with people that are now establishing them as part of a new generation of experts. So there's Matthijs Maas, who was an intern at HCSS, who now has a book out with Oxford University Press. And then there's your own Claudia, sitting here on the front row, who used to be an intern at HCSS, I think 5 years ago, before you started your PhD, something along these lines. And we co-authored a paper on specifically looking at opportunities, if you want to use that word, to control robots and autonomous systems along this chain that I sketched earlier. You mentioned in the introduction, and you're going to get your PhD next year. I was just informed. So the next generation is here. So I also wanted to add, and thank you for mentioning that in the introduction, that HCSS has been asked by the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs to host the RE-AIM Commission, the Secretariat, I would have to say, to host the Secretariat of the Global Commission for the Responsible Use of Artificial Intelligence in the Military Domain, where I serve as an academic advisor. Now, a good share of the remarks today is based on a paper I've been working on with Sofia Romanski, who's also here in the room, who is our Secretariat Coordinator of the RE-AIM Commission. And the paper that we've been working on will be published later this year by the Center for International Governance Innovation in Canada. With that, for the remainder of this lecture, I will proceed as follows. I want to briefly talk about the use and utility of norms, international norms. I will then highlight 6 challenges to norms development in the sphere of military AI. I will briefly survey the emerging normative landscape, what types of military initiatives are out there. I will then distinguish 7 focus areas, 7 normative focus areas. And then rather than giving you a full agenda, I will offer some observations on the way forward for international norms development in this sphere. Yes. Okay. Norms, the use and utility of norms. I didn't bring a lot of moving images, so I hope that you will bear with me for the next 30 minutes or so, or 25 minutes. Okay, thank you, Bérénice. So what are international norms? International norms are sets of collective expectations that guide the behavior of actors as a reflection of their identities and moral values. So there is a real notion as to that norms entailing standards of appropriate behavior, but that really relates to the identity of the actor, liberal democratic identity, for instance, in this part of the world, who supposedly is more open towards embracing core values associated with international humanitarian law. Now, norms are not necessarily hard law. They are committed to on a voluntary basis, and they can help contribute to a degree of predictability in an otherwise highly uncertain setting, which is of course the case if we speak about emerging technologies and how they may or may not affect international security. International norms emerge and evolve through repeated interstate interactions, where mutual adherence at first is dependent on voluntary agreement, trust, and common understanding. In turn, international norms have a place in soft law, as they are not legally binding, but can form the foundation for regulations and policies. And this way, norms are a more dynamic and flexible counterpart to a codified law that can then help standardize behavior in areas that are not yet captured by regulations. In addition, it makes sense to add two more distinctions. There is norms with a capital N, some of which have become enshrined in, for instance, international humanitarian law, and there are smaller N norms which relate at a much more granular level to protocols and procedures that are part and parcel of the modus operandi of organizations, including military organizations, the ways in which technology functions. That's one. It also makes sense to add the distinction between social norms and legal norms. Legal norms pertain to norms that in effect will then have legal standing. You also have social norms which reflect on appropriate behavior by actors as considered by other actors. I want to let that sink in for a moment. Yes. Now, norms emerge. Once norms they're formulated, they're framed, and once norms propagate more widely throughout an international system or a regional system, they can form an institutionalized collection of practices and rules defining appropriate behavior for specific groups of actors in specific situations, according, quote unquote, to Martin Olsen. They can then become internalized, and they can then become part of hard law. In this framework that I sketch you could say that normative regimes go beyond temporary arrangements and they become a real foundation for cooperation between states, and states use them to guide and steer their behavior. An important question is, how do norms emerge? This is a very large field of study in its own right. I think particularly insightful and most impactful has been the work of Martha Finmore, who coined the notion of a norm life cycle. She speaks of norm emergence, norms cascade, and norms internalization. And let me not dwell. Norms emergence is about the formulation and the framing of a norm. That norm then gets discussed, propagated by a number of actors. At a certain moment in time, it's no longer something that 1 or 2 or 10 actors do, but a coalition or a group or a community, I should say, of actors use that norm, and then she speaks of norms, norm cascade. If norms then become more entrenched and really fundamental to values, the values and the behavior of actors, you could argue that norm internalization takes place. This is a very complex process. It's hard to trace. You can sort of take a step back and do it for particular sub areas. It's complex rather than linear, and it really emerges from also not just top-down efforts, but also micro-level interactions between relevant actors. Now, there's various strategies that norm entrepreneurs that want to formulate and then proliferate the norm can take, which include persuasion, socialization, and even coercion. And they can use various instruments, whether it's track 1.0 or track 2.0 dialogues, whether it's discussions at international conferences, whether it's declarations of intent, or the publication of higher level principles by states and international organizations. So if you take a step back, this provides, I hope, an interesting and perhaps even a relevant framework to look at if you see there's an international conference on AI, or you read another strategy or another document with high level principles, you see it's an attempt to formulate norms and to propagate them. I think there are 3 conditions that not only favor the propagation, but also the institutionalization of norms. Adoptability. verifiability, and enforceability of norms. Now, adaptability can be straightforwardly defined as the extent to which norms are amenable to agreement and approval by key actors based on a combination of their interests and their values. In the case of AI in the military domain, this is troublesome. This is problematic because it also depends on the assessments of the potential military advantages that key states can derive from the use of military AI, which it will then weigh against their core moral values. As such, adaptability is the outcome of, again, a strategic process. So values and interests. 2, verifiability, in turn, refers to whether the compliance of states with norms can be established, either through formal regimes, think of institutionalized inspection regimes, or less formal means, for instance, through monitoring by non-state actors. And 3, enforceability refers to the extent to which norm compliance can actually be effectuated, can be enforced. Even voluntary and non-legally binding norms at some point need to be enforced in one way or another in order to be able to evolve into more concrete rules and regulations down the line. So we have military AI applications emerging. We have the role that norms can play in helping regulate their production, proliferation, deployment, and employment. But there are a number of challenges for norm development in this sphere. Let me outline and highlight 6 of them. The first challenge is that AI is an all-purpose technology. It encompasses a wide range of multi-purpose technology and applications. So most broadly, it can be understood as a system that can carry out tasks at a level comparable with or normally dependent on human intelligence, with varying degrees of autonomy and adaptability. But if you think of regulating that, it is absolutely essential to first decide on a definition of AI that reflects the goals of the normative initiative, but also zooms in on the respective situation in which these norms would, should, and could apply. The second challenge is the variety of inputs that go into AI applications. We know that AI applications are dependent on an assortment of inputs: data to train AI models, computing power to process the data, human talent to develop algorithms, and institutions to guide these interactions following discrete value sets. Some of this can be regulated, or let me put that differently. Some of this can be tackled, controlled using policy measures. Other areas less so. So AI models, training data, and resulting algorithms are fundamental to AI applications, can be shared digitally with relative ease. So it's harder to control that. This is why many of these efforts focus at the more intangible elements of AI. The physical basis. Sorry, let me frame that differently. This is why efforts focus on the physical basis of AI applications, or the hardware components that establish the computer processing capabilities for the training and deployment of AI. This is what's currently happening, and this is what the Netherlands, with our semiconductor industry, is the target of restrictive policies that are proposed from the US front. The third challenge relates to the diversity of actors involved in the AI chain, whether it's the production, the proliferation, the employment, and the deployment chain. There is a wide assortment of action that really come from different backgrounds that each have their own interests and values. And that also makes it very hard to establish frameworks to control any elements along this chain. Challenge number 4 is the role of AI in interstate strategic competition. We've seen the intensification of interstate strategic competition over the past few years in the political, in the economic, in the military realm. And we now see that major and non-major powers are adapting their military postures and investing heavily in AI. There is, of course, uncertainty about the extent to which AI will alter global or regional balance of power. But it does explain why many key powers do not want to commit to something that can tie their hands up front, as long as they do not know what military advantages it can generate. A fifth challenge relates to the AI power paradox. Put simply, the current rate of AI development, I sketched it in my introduction, outpaces the rate at which policies can be formulated and adopted. And that creates the so-called AI power paradox. At the same time, regulating agencies, whether it's international efforts or whether it's governments, they know that policies created now will contribute to actual path dependencies. What we decide upon now will shape inevitably what the future looks like. The challenge there is, how do you deal with the epistemological uncertainty as to the impact of what the impact of AI may be on the one hand, and how do you develop policies that you can flexibly update as AI matures? Now, that means that discussions about regulation need to take into account both timeliness and longevity, and need to start focusing not on specific applications. No, I should frame it differently. They should articulate the core values that they wish to protect. Now, sixth and finally, the challenge is the difficulty of verifying the use of AI in the military domain. It is often difficult, if not nearly impossible, to determine whether and how AI has been used in the military context. As such, even if we would establish rules and regulation around the use of military AI, the process of verification, one of the criteria that I suggested, makes it very difficult to see whether there has been adherence to these rules. This is, of course, due to the way that AI is integrated into military systems, as well as across these entire OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, and act that I mentioned earlier on. This challenge is already visible in today's conflicts. There's a lot of debate as to what extent employment of the gospel and lavender has been employed and how it has affected the targeting process. So there's a lot of things that we don't know there. In other places, whether it's Azerbaijan or Ukraine, it is difficult to establish from the outside the degree to which the systems that have been deployed have been partly or fully autonomous. As such, for effective governance, for the effective development of norms that are applied, verification issues need to be addressed. Now, meanwhile, the international community, or I should say communities, have been busy. We see in this sphere an emerging normative landscape. It is ongoing, it's blossoming, we would argue, albeit in its early stages. We've taken a look, Sofia Romansky and I, at the number of initiatives that are out there. And over the past few years, really, numerous initiatives have sprung up. We're not going to go over all 19 or 11 military initiatives in here, but to mention a few: the Responsible Artificial Intelligence Military Domain Summit Declaration, the United States Political Declaration on Responsible Military Use of Artificial Intelligence Autonomy, the Latin American Agreement Conference of Social and Humanitarian Impact of Autonomous Weapons, the NATO Artificial Intelligence Strategy, and the ongoing work, of course, of the group of governmental experts on emerging technology in the area of lethal autonomous weapon systems, and so on and so forth. What our overview makes clear is that there's significant membership overlap among many of these international initiatives. We find that many states in specifically Sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia are underrepresented. And we find that many of these initiatives are not necessarily complementary, but sometimes they do complement, but neither do they necessarily compete. Their mandates and goals differ substantially, and there are also inevitable points where these ideas and focuses overlap. Now, we've done a manual coding, if you like, a manual analysis of the normative focus areas, in which we looked at the focus areas, the normative focused areas that are either explicitly referenced or implicitly identified, and we could make that up in the context within these initiatives. And we've identified 7 normative focus areas. I'm thinking, how much time do we still have left, Bérénice? Yeah. Okay, so we identified 7 normative focus areas, and again, we came up with them inductively. 1, accordance with international law. 2, responsibility and accountability. 3, explainability and traceability. 4, bias and harm mitigation. 5, reliability. 6, governability. And 7, the exchange of practices. Now, these 7 normative focus areas, we've evaluated them both on the extent to which they are adoptable by key actors, by actors, not key actors, by actors, the extent to which they're verifiable and the extent to which they're enforceable. That's one strand. And we looked at the extent to the degree to which these higher level norms were operationalized, if you like, and formulated with greater degrees of clarity, so that they could actually form the input for rules and regulations. Now, I think I'm not going to go over each and every normative area, because then we would still be here at 6:30. But let me highlight 2 things. Yes, and let's then go to a Q&A. I think it's better looking across the room. Based on our assessment, which we'll publish shortly, there's a lot that can be said about future potential normative developments in this sphere, and we offer a number of suggestions. 1, efforts in elucidating international law could focus further on articulating and specifying which core international laws are relevant to which particular uses of AI in the military domain. And I know I'm not only preaching to the choir, but I will also know that the choir will probably give back to me, no, but we have already done that. So we'll get back to that. 2, efforts aimed at responsibility and accountability could focus on the entire AI lifecycle and thereby clarify the onus of responsibility. And I know that Bérénice has done some work on that, including by clearly demarcating areas of responsibility and distinguishing between individual and state responsibility. 3, efforts to strengthen explainability and traceability could consider more technical issues within these higher level political deliberations and address issues related to the double black box, the fact that we don't know what's going on within the AI decision-making system, and the fact that it's taking place in the military sphere and the security sphere, and then therefore that actors guard closely what is happening there in order to not give away sensitive secrets. And hereby they could focus both on technical measures, how can we exchange information without giving away these classified secrets, and also look at social measures in the realm of confidence building measures. Efforts to strengthen bias and harm mitigation in turn could address standards and issues related to responsible practices. In addition, they could also address consequence of bias and harm ex post, rather than only focusing on mitigation ex ante. 5. Efforts to strengthen reliability could focus on developments of standards and protocols. It's more a technical thing, you would almost argue. But that, of course, is infused not by a data engineer that sets a standard and protocol, but definitions and discussions about what reliability entails and how that can be encoded. Efforts to strengthen governability could clarify how national and international governance will interact with each other. And efforts to strengthen the exchange of practices should focus on technical and social aspects and address the conflicting incentives that public and private actors have. Now, we have a much more detailed layout of what that entails in practice. But if we then take a step back and we look at what that means for the way forward for this field, I offer 5 higher level observations. One goes back to that AI power paradox, right? Or the so-called Collingridge dilemma, where there is on the one hand, a lack of information, a lack of clarity of the actual impact that it will have, versus the fact that right now there is not a lot of entrenchment of various positions. And dealing with the dilemma means that AI rules and regulations need to first clarify the overall values they wish to maintain, and then proceed iteratively, in the sense that they will start now and then develop further. The second observation is that strategic competition in combination with the epistemological uncertainty really puts a strain on finding consensus, but it also provides a push towards lowest common denominator agreements. And that is, of course, not necessarily good news. There's 2 observations. One, let's double down and make an extra effort. But 2, from history, we know that prior efforts can lay the foundation for subsequent efforts to build on. So even though there is unclarity, you can start discussing these issues now, start formulating more general rules and regulations, which you can then, in due course, when it becomes more clear, build on. Three, the responsible use of AI in the military domain includes all aspects of the AI lifecycle and involves thereby the entire production, proliferation, deployment, and employment chain. So norm development in this field for the responsible use of military AI should be concerned with that entire chain. And then between brackets, the takeaway, focus on the entire chain. 4, most of the normative initiatives still find themselves concerned with rather high conceptual issues, eschewing technical details and lacking concrete operationalization. So it's time to become more specific about the particular areas, normative focus areas, particular goals, and what that means in terms of rules and regulation. And 5, because the level of norm development really varies, the maturity of it along these different normative focus areas that we distinguish, the sheer amount of attention and the energy and the diversity of initiatives out there should be seen as a strength and serve as an opportunity. It can help boost further momentum, and it can also help bring together perhaps sometimes disparate communities to further operationalize and institutionalize norm development. So the message here is complement and amplify. Now, finally, the multifaceted nature of AI requires a multi-pronged approach. As such, the priorities for an agenda for norms development in this sphere should focus on formulating norms that steer development and use of AI in the military domain towards an optimal trade-off, and let's talk about that, between maximizing benefits and minimizing risks, whilst adhering to core fundamental ethical principles as enshrined in international humanitarian law. Thank you very much.